The sound of a ventilator is something you never get used to, even after 3 tours in the sandbox. But hearing that mechanical wheeze coming from my wife, that broke something inside me that I didn't think could be broken. She wasn't just hurt. She was obliterated. And the man who did it was standing in the hospital hallway, wearing a badge and drinking coffee like it was just another Tuesday. CTA. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. Story. I had been on a plane for 14 hours. The flight from Munich to Chicago, then the connecting hop to our small town in Montana, had left me stiff and exhausted. All I wanted was the smell of Morgan's hair and the taste of her pot roast. I had been gone for 6 months on a private security contract, glorified babysitting for a tech billionaire who was afraid of his own shadow. It paid well, enough to pay off the mortgage, enough to finally start the family Morgan and I had been talking about for years. I didn't call her when I landed. I wanted to surprise her. I had the cab drop me off a block away so I could walk up the driveway, quiet as a ghost, and catch her in the garden or the kitchen. But when I turned the corner onto our street, the silence was wrong. There were no birds, no neighborhood dogs barking, just the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the snow on my front lawn. My front door was wide open, hanging off one hinge. My duffel bag hit the pavement. I didn't run. I sprinted. "Sir, stay back." A rookie deputy I didn't recognize stepped in front of me, hand hovering over his holster. "That is my house," I said, my voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "Where is my wife? Your hunter? Where is Morgan?" I roared, stepping into his personal space. "St. Mary's Hospital. Ambulance left 10 minutes ago." "Sir, you can't go inside. It's a crime scene." I didn't care about the crime scene. I turned around, flagged down the same cab that was just pulling away, and told him to drive like hell. The emergency room was chaos, but I moved through it with the kind of focus the military drills into you. You don't panic. You assess. You locate. You neutralize obstacles. The obstacle currently was a nurse with a clipboard telling me to wait. I didn't wait. I found her in ICU Bay 4. Morgan. My beautiful, vibrant Morgan. Her face was a map of violence. Her left eye was swollen shut, the skin purple and black. Her lip was split so wide it needed stitches. But it was the way she was breathing that terrified me. Shallow, ragged gasps that hitched in her chest. A doctor stepped out, looking tired. "Mr. Hunter, is she going to make it?" I asked. I didn't recognize my own voice. It was cold, detached. "She's stable," the doctor said, keeping his voice low. "But the damage is severe. 3 fractured ribs, 2 broken. 1 punctured the lung, which is why we have the tube in. Her jaw is fractured. She has defensive wounds on her forearms. Whoever did this, they wanted to hurt her. Badly." I looked at Morgan's sleeping form. The machines beeped in a steady rhythm. I reached out and took her hand. It was the only part of her that didn't look bruised. "Did she say who?" I asked. "She was barely conscious when she came in," the doctor said, hesitating. "She muttered something about a uniform. A badge." My blood ran cold. "A cop." The doctor didn't answer. He just checked the chart and walked away, looking uncomfortable. I sat there for 4 hours until her eyes fluttered open. When she saw me, she didn't smile. She flinched. She tried to pull away, terror flooding her good eye. "It's me," I whispered, leaning in close. "It's Hunter. I'm home." She let out a sob that racked her broken ribs, causing the monitors to spike. "I'm sorry," she wheezed through the wires. "I'm so sorry. Who did this, Morgan?" She squeezed my hand so hard her knuckles turned white. "Dominic," she whispered. "Officer Dominic." I knew the name. Dominic was a high school football star who never grew up, got a badge, and thought it made him a king. "Why?" I asked. He came for the neighborhood donation fund," she rasped. I told him we didn't have cash. He pushed inside. He said I needed to show some respect. She started crying again, the sound wet and painful. I tried to call the station. He smashed the phone. He just kept hitting me, "Hunter." He wouldn't stop. I kissed her forehead, my lips brushing against the bandage. Rest now. I'll handle it. Hunter, don't, she begged, clutching my sleeve. He said the sheriff knows. He said they all know. Sleep. I walked out of that hospital room a different man than the one who entered. The concerned husband was gone. The operator was back. I drove straight to the sheriff's station. It was a small brick building that smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Sheriff Grant was behind the front desk, laughing at something on his computer screen. He was a big man, soft around the middle, with a smile that never reached his eyes. Hunter, he said, not looking up. Heard you were back. Shame about the wife. I want to file a report, I said, placing my hands on the counter. Against Officer Dominic. Grant finally looked up. He chuckled, a low, wet sound. Now, son, let's not get hasty. We already looked into it. Looks like a break-in. Probably some junkies from out of town. She identified him. I said, my voice steady. She said it was Dominic. Grant sighed, leaning back in his chair. Head injuries make people confused, Hunter. Dominic was on patrol on the other side of town. His logs prove it. Besides, why would one of my boys hurt a sweet thing like Morgan? Unless. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Unless she was asking for it. You've been gone a long time, son. A woman gets lonely. The air in the room seemed to vanish. I felt that familiar hum in my nervous system, the adrenaline dump that prepares you for violence. I looked at Grant's throat. It would take me less than 2 seconds to crush his windpipe. I could snap his neck before he even reached for the Glock on his hip. But there were cameras. There were other deputies in the back. If I acted now, I'd be in a cell, and Morgan would be unprotected. You think this is funny? I asked softly. I think you need to go home, cool off, and take care of your wife, Grant said, his smile disappearing. And stop throwing around accusations you can't prove. It's dangerous. People disappear when they ask the wrong questions. He was threatening me, to my face, in a police station. I stared at him for a long moment, memorizing every pore on his face, the way his badge tilted slightly to the left, the arrogance in his eyes. You're right, Sheriff, I said, backing away slowly. I should go home. I walked out into the cold night air. The rage was still there, burning like a furnace, but now it was cold, controlled, calculated. They thought I was just a husband. They thought I was just a guy who worked security. They didn't know about the black ops contracts. They didn't know about the things I had done in places that didn't exist on maps. Grant laughed at me. Dominic broke my wife's ribs. They thought they were the predators because they wore badges. They had no idea they had just walked into the cage with the tiger. I pulled my phone out and dialed a number I hadn't used in 3 years. It's me, I said when the line clicked open. I need the kit, and I need the shovel. The man on the other end of the line didn't ask questions. He never did. His name was Tristan, and he ran a very particular kind of supply business for people like me, people who operated in the shadows. 2 days later, a package arrived at a P.O. box 3 towns over. Inside was everything I needed. Encrypted phones, cash and unmarked bills, surveillance equipment, and a Glock 19 with no serial number. But before I went to war, I had to try the legal route. Not because I believed in it, but because Morgan needed to see that I tried. She was still in the hospital, recovering slowly. The doctors said she'd need months of physical therapy. Every time I visited, she looked smaller, more fragile, like something inside her had been permanently shattered. I hired a lawyer named Preston. He had a small office above a diner, and his suit was a little too tight around the shoulders. But he had a reputation for taking on cops, and that was all I cared about. I'll be honest with you, Hunter, Preston said, sliding a folder across his desk. This is going to be an uphill battle. I pulled Dominic's file. Clean record. Commendations. The sheriff vouched for him personally. And your wife's medical report? It's damning, but without physical evidence tying Dominic to the scene, it's her word against his. She identified him. I said, my jaw tight. I know, but trauma victims make mistakes. That's what his defense will argue. They'll say she was confused, disoriented. They'll drag her through the mud, hunt her. They'll make her relive it in front of a jury. And even if we win, he gets suspended. Maybe a settlement. Maybe nothing. I leaned forward, my hands flat on his desk. So what do I do? Preston hesitated, then lowered his voice. You walk away. You take your wife, you move to another state, and you start over. Because if you push this, they'll destroy you both. I've seen it happen. Cops protect their own. I stood up without another word and walked out. Preston called after me, but I didn't turn around. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. It just wasn't designed to protect people like Morgan. That night, I began surveillance on Dominic. I parked 2 blocks from his apartment, a rundown complex near the railroad tracks. He lived alone, which was good. No collateral. No innocent people getting caught in the crossfire. He came home at 11:30, still in uniform, carrying a 6-pack of beer. He walked with a swagger, like the world owed him something. I watched him unlock his door, step inside, and turn on the TV. Through the thin curtains, I could see him laugh at something on the screen. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You're being followed. I checked the rearview mirror. A black SUV with tinted windows was idling at the corner, headlights off. I hadn't noticed it before, which meant whoever was inside was good. I started the engine and pulled out slowly, watching the SUV in my mirror. It followed at a distance, staying just far enough back to be subtle. I took 3 quick turns, looping through side streets, and the SUV stayed with me. This wasn't random. This was a message. I pulled into a gas station, got out, and walked inside like I was buying coffee. The SUV parked across the street. I counted to 30, then walked back out and drove home. The SUV didn't follow this time. It didn't need to. They had made their point. When I got home, I checked every inch of the property for bugs or cameras. Nothing. But the threat was clear. They were watching me, and they wanted me to know it. Morgan came home 3 days later. I had cleaned the house, fixed the broken door, and repainted the hallway where her blood had stained the wall. She moved slowly, each step careful, like her body was made of glass. I don't feel safe here, she whispered that first night, sitting on the edge of the bed. I know, I said, sitting beside her. But we can't run. Not yet. Hunter, what are you planning? Her good eyes searched my face, looking for something. Reassurance, maybe, or a promise that I wouldn't do something reckless. I'm planning to make sure this never happens to anyone else, I said quietly. That sounds like revenge. It's justice. She reached for my hand, her fingers trembling. Please don't become the thing you hate. I kissed her forehead gently. I won't. But I was lying. I had already become it. The next morning, I went back to the lawyer's office. Preston looked surprised to see me. I need everything you have on Dominic, I said, and I need it off the record. Preston frowned. Hunter, I can't. I'm not asking you to break the law. I'm asking you to give me what I paid for. He stared at me for a long moment, then pulled out a thumb drive from his desk drawer. This is his employment history, disciplinary records, complaints filed against him. Most of them were dismissed, but there's a pattern. 3 women in the last 5 years claimed he used excessive force during domestic calls. One said he assaulted her. All cases were closed due to lack of evidence. I took the drive. Thank you. Hunter, Preston said as I reached the door. Whatever you're thinking, don't. These people play dirty. You can't win. I don't need to win, I said. I just need them to lose. That night, I sat in my basement, the thumb drive plugged into an encrypted laptop. I read every file, every complaint, every dismissal. Dominic wasn't just dirty. He was a predator with a badge, and Sheriff Grant had been covering for him for years. But the most interesting file was the last one. A cold case from 6 years ago. A woman named Ivy had filed a restraining order against Dominic after he showed up at her house unannounced multiple times. 2 weeks later, she disappeared. The case was marked as a voluntary missing person. No investigation. No follow-up. I opened a separate browser and searched for Ivy's name. Nothing. No social media. No obituary. It was like she had been erased. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces clicking into place. Dominic had done this before, and Grant had helped him bury it. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, it was a photo. It was me, sitting in my car outside Dominic's apartment. The message beneath it read, "Stop, or she's next." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. They weren't just threatening me anymore. They were threatening Morgan. I deleted the message, pulled the battery from the phone, and walked upstairs. Morgan was asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. I sat beside her, watching the rise and fall of her chest. They thought fear would stop me. They thought intimidation would work. But they didn't understand something fundamental about men like me. We don't stop when we're scared. We stop when the mission is complete. And my mission had just begun. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photo. Me sitting in my car, vulnerable, exposed. They had been watching me while I was watching them. That meant they had resources, coordination, and most importantly, they were scared. Scared people make mistakes. I needed to find Ivy. If Dominic had made her disappear, there would be a trail. There's always a trail. People think covering up a crime is about erasing evidence, but it's really about erasing attention. And attention leaves footprints. By dawn, I was back at my laptop, digging through public records. Ivy's full name was Ivy Caldwell. She had been 26 when she vanished. No family listed in the area. No employment records after her disappearance. Her apartment lease had been terminated by the landlord after 3 months of unpaid rent. Her car was found abandoned at a truck stop near the state line. The police report was thin, just 2 pages. The investigating officer's name jumped off the screen, Sheriff Grant. Of course it was. I printed everything and drove to the county records office. The clerk behind the desk was an older woman named Paige, with reading glasses on a chain and a tired smile. "I need to pull property records for 6 years ago," I said. "Specifically, any land purchases or transfers involving Sheriff Grant or Officer Dominic." Paige raised an eyebrow. "That's oddly specific. I'm doing research," I said, sliding a $20 bill across the counter. "For a book." She pocketed the money without blinking and disappeared into the back. 20 minutes later, she returned with a stack of files. "Grant bought a hunting cabin up near Echo Ridge that same year," she said, flipping through the pages. "Paid cash. No mortgage. It's about 40 miles north, off Route 12. Remote area. No neighbors for miles." My pulse quickened. "Can you print me the address?" "Already did." She handed me a sheet of paper. "You didn't get this from me." "Get what?" I said, folding the paper into my jacket. I left the office and sat in my truck, staring at the address. Echo Ridge. I knew the area, dense forest, old logging roads, the kind of place where nobody asks questions. If you wanted to hide something, or someone, that's where you'd go. But I couldn't just drive up there without preparation. If Grant or Dominic suspected I was getting close, they'd move whatever evidence existed. Or worse, they'd come after Morgan again. I needed leverage. I needed someone on the inside. That afternoon, I reached out to an old contact from my contracting days. His name was Ryder, and he worked in digital forensics for a private firm that didn't ask questions. I sent him Dominic's phone number and badge number. "I need everything," I told him over an encrypted call. Texts, call logs, GPS data, deleted files. Anything you can pull. "This is a cop," Ryder said slowly. "You know that's going to cost extra, right?" "I don't care. Just do it. Give me 48 hours. I spent those 2 days keeping up appearances. I visited Morgan at home, brought her soup, helped her with physical therapy exercises. She was getting stronger, but the fear hadn't left her eyes. Every time a car passed the house, she flinched. Every time the doorbell rang, she froze. "Hunter, I keep having nightmares," she said one evening, her voice small. "I see him standing over me, and I can't move. I can't scream." I held her close, feeling the fragile bones of her shoulders beneath my hands. "He won't touch you again." I promise. How can you promise that? She whispered. He's a cop. They all protect him. Because I'm not going through the system anymore, I said quietly. I'm going around it. She pulled back, searching my face. What does that mean? It means you don't need to know the details. You just need to trust me. She nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't believe I could stop them. And maybe she was right to doubt. But she didn't know what I was capable of. Nobody in this town did. 2 days later, Ryder called back. You're not going to like this, he said. Dominic's phone is clean. Too clean. Like someone scrubbed it professionally. But I found something in his cloud backup that he forgot to delete. Text messages between him and Grant from 6 years ago. Send them to me. My laptop pinged. I opened the file and started reading. The messages were coded, but the meaning was clear. Grant had helped Dominic move something to the cabin. They referenced the problem and making it go away. The final message, sent 2 days after Ivy disappeared, was chilling. It's done. Nobody's looking. We're clear. I sat back, my mind racing. This wasn't just a cover-up. This was a murder. I forwarded the messages to a secure server, then deleted them from my laptop. If this went sideways, I needed insurance. But first, I needed proof. Real, physical proof. That night, I packed a go bag. Night vision goggles, tactical gloves, a flashlight with a red lens, and my Glock. I told Morgan I was going to check on a security job out of town and would be back by morning. She didn't ask questions, which worried me more than if she had. The drive to Echo Ridge took an hour. The road narrowed as I climbed into the mountains, the trees closing in on both sides. I parked a mile from the cabin and hiked the rest of the way on foot, moving silently through the underbrush. The cabin was small, barely more than a shack, with a rusted tin roof and boarded-up windows. There was no car outside, no lights. It looked abandoned. I circled the perimeter, checking for cameras or tripwires. Nothing. Either Grant was arrogant, or he thought nobody would ever find this place. The front door was locked, but the lock was old. I had it open in 30 seconds. Inside, the air was stale and cold. I clicked on my flashlight, keeping the beam low. The main room was empty except for a rotting couch and a table covered in dust. But in the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a trapdoor. I pulled it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The smell hit me immediately, damp earth, mildew, and something else. Something sweet and rotten. I descended slowly, my hand on my gun. The basement was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with dirt walls and a concrete floor. And there, in the corner, partially covered by a tarp, was a shallow grave. I didn't need to dig. I could see the edge of fabric, the pale curve of bone. Ivy. I stood there for a long moment, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth would crack. This was the proof. This was what Grant and Dominic had buried. I took photos with my phone, dozens of them, documenting every angle. Then I covered the grave again and climbed back upstairs. As I stepped outside, I heard the crunch of gravel. Headlights swept through the trees. Someone was coming. I killed the flashlight and dropped into a crouch beside the cabin wall. The headlights grew brighter, cutting through the darkness like knives. A truck rolled up the narrow path, a lifted Ford with mud tires and a sheriff's department decal on the door. Grant. He parked 20 feet from the cabin and stepped out, a shotgun cradled in his arms. He wasn't alone. Dominic emerged from the passenger side, scanning the tree line with a handheld spotlight. You sure you saw something? Dominic asked, his voice carrying through the cold air. Motion sensor pinged my phone an hour ago, Grant replied, racking the shotgun. Could be a deer. Could be something else. I pressed myself against the cabin's outer wall, controlling my breathing. They were between me and my truck. If they searched the woods, they'd find my tracks. If they went inside, they'd see the disturbed trapdoor. I had two options, run or fight. Running meant leaving evidence behind. Fighting meant escalating this into something I couldn't take back. Dominic swept the spotlight across the cabin windows. The beam passed inches from my head. I didn't move. Doors unlocked, Grant said suddenly, his voice sharp. They both raised their weapons and approached the entrance. I had maybe 10 seconds before they went inside and realized someone had been in the basement. I moved fast and silent, circling wide through the trees, using the darkness as cover. My truck was a mile away, but I couldn't lead them back to it. I needed them to think this was random, a drifter, maybe, or kids looking for a place to party. Behind me, I heard Grant's voice boom from inside the cabin. Someone's been here. Check the basement. I broke into a run, abandoning stealth for speed. Branches whipped my face. My boots pounded the frozen ground. Behind me, the spotlight swept wildly through the trees, and I heard Dominic shout something I couldn't make out. A gunshot cracked through the night. The bullet hit a tree trunk to my left, spraying bark. I didn't stop. I zigzagged through the forest, using every trick I'd learned in hostile territory. Finally, I reached my truck, threw myself inside, and gunned the engine. The tires spun on the icy road before catching, and I shot down the mountain with my headlights off, navigating by memory and moonlight. In my rearview mirror, I saw Grant's truck explode out of the tree line, headlights blazing. They were coming after me. I took a hard turn onto a logging road I'd scouted earlier, the truck fishtailing on the gravel. Grant followed, but he didn't know these back roads like I did. I led him deeper into the mountains, then cut my engine and coasted into a ravine, hidden by thick pines. I sat in the darkness, my heart hammering, and watched Grant's headlights pass by on the road above. He slowed, searching, then finally gave up and drove back toward the cabin. I waited another 20 minutes before restarting the engine and taking a different route home. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky was turning gray with dawn. Morgan was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red from crying. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I told you. A job. Don't lie to me, Hunter." Her hands shook as she set down the cup. "I heard sirens last night. Multiple units heading north. And you come home looking like you've been through a war." I sat down across from her, exhausted. "I found something. Proof that Dominic has done this before. Proof that Grant helped him cover it up." Her face went pale. "What kind of proof?" "The kind that could put them both away for life." "Then take it to the FBI. Take it to someone who can help." "I will," I lied. "But I need to be smart about it. If I move too fast, they'll bury the evidence and disappear." She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "Hunter, please. I can't lose you too. If something happens to you because of me, nothing is going to happen," I said firmly. "I'm in control." But I wasn't, and we both knew it. The next morning, everything changed. I was making breakfast when I heard vehicles pull up outside. Through the window, I saw 3 sheriff's cruisers and an unmarked sedan. Grant stepped out, followed by Dominic and 2 other deputies I didn't recognize. "Stay inside," I told Morgan, moving toward the door. Grant didn't knock. He kicked the door open, his gun drawn. "Hunter." On the ground. "Now." I raised my hands slowly, keeping my movements calm. "What's this about, Sheriff?" "You're under arrest for trespassing, destruction of property, and assaulting an officer," Grant barked. Dominic rushed forward and slammed me face first into the floor, wrenching my arms behind my back. The cuffs bit into my wrists. Morgan screamed. "He didn't do anything. He was here all night." "That's not what the evidence says," Dominic sneered, pressing his knee into my spine. "We found your boot prints at a crime scene. We found your fingerprints on a door that was forced open. And we have video of you fleeing when ordered to stop. They were setting me up. The motion sensor at the cabin hadn't been an accident. It was a trap. They'd known I was getting close, and now they were neutralizing me." "You have the right to remain silent," Grant said, grinning down at me. "But I sure hope you don't. I'd love to hear you try to explain this one." They dragged me outside in front of the neighbors. Mrs. Kendra from next door stood on her porch, filming with her phone. The deputies shoved me into the back of a cruiser, and I watched through the window as Morgan collapsed on the front steps, sobbing. At the station, They threw me into an interrogation room and left me there for 3 hours. No water, no phone call, just the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the metallic scrape of the cuffs every time I shifted. Finally, Grant walked in, a file folder under his arm. He sat down across from me, spreading crime scene photos on the table. "You should have stayed out of it, Hunter," he said, shaking his head. "You're a smart guy. Military background. Private security. You should have known better." "I know what you did," I said quietly. "I know about Ivy." Grant's smile faltered for just a second. Then it came back, colder than before. "I don't know who that is. You buried her. 6 years ago. You and Dominic. And now you're trying to bury me." Grant leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Let me explain something to you, son. In this county, I am the law. I decide what's true and what's not. And the truth is, you broke into private property, destroyed evidence, and fled from law enforcement. That's 10 years minimum. Maybe more if I find something else to charge you with. Or," he continued, his voice dropping, "you could make this easy. You could sign a confession saying you've been under a lot of stress since coming home. Post-traumatic stress, maybe. You got confused, paranoid, made some mistakes. We get you some help. You do a little time in a psych facility, and everyone moves on. And if I don't," Grant's smile widened, "then I make sure your wife has an accident. A bad one. Maybe her brakes fail. Maybe she takes too many pills. Grief does terrible things to people." The rage that flooded my system was cold and absolute. I stared at Grant, memorizing every line on his face, every flicker of arrogance in his eyes. "I'll sign," I said. Grant looked surprised. Smart man. He slid the paper across the table. I read it carefully. A full confession to crimes I didn't commit, a waiver of my rights, a psychiatric evaluation recommendation. I picked up the pen, and then I saw it. A small envelope tucked under the file folder. It had fallen out when Grant opened it. On the front, in neat handwriting, was a single word: insurance. Grant hadn't noticed. He was too busy gloating. I signed the paper slowly, committing every word to memory. Then I slid it back across the table. "Good," Grant said, standing. "You'll be processed and transferred to county psych by tomorrow. And Hunter, if you ever come near me or my men again, you won't get a second chance." He left the room. The door locked behind him. I sat there in the silence, staring at the two-way mirror. They thought they'd won. They thought fear and threats and legal manipulation would break me. They had no idea what they'd just done. They'd given me time. Time to think. Time to plan. And when I got out, there would be no more warnings. No more legal system. No more rules. Just consequences. They transferred me to county psychiatric evaluation the next morning. The facility was 30 miles outside of town, a gray building surrounded by chain-link fencing. I spent 2 days answering questions from a therapist named Dr. Eliza, who clearly didn't believe a word of my confession, but had been paid to sign off on it anyway. On the third day, Morgan visited. She looked worse than when I'd left. Dark circles under her eyes, her hair unwashed, her hands trembling as she sat across from me in the visiting room. "They're watching the house," she said immediately, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dominic drives by every few hours. Sometimes he parks across the street and just sits there. He's trying to intimidate you," I said, keeping my voice calm even though fury was boiling inside me. "Don't let him in. Don't talk to him. Hunter, there's something I need to tell you." She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" She took a shaky breath. "I knew Dominic. From high school. We dated for about 6 months senior year before I broke it off. He didn't take it well. He followed me around for weeks, showed up at my house, called me constantly. My parents almost got a restraining order." I stared at her, processing. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because it was 15 years ago. I thought he'd moved on. I thought it didn't matter anymore." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "But when he came to the house that night, he said things. He said I never should have married you. He said I belonged to him first. That's when I tried to push him away, and he just snapped. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't random brutality. This was obsession. Dominic had been waiting years for an opportunity, and my deployment had given it to him. There's more, Morgan continued, her voice breaking. My father, before he died, he borrowed money. A lot of it. From people he shouldn't have. Grant was one of them. What? I leaned forward, the chair scraping against the floor. Daddy gambled. He got in deep with some loan sharks, and Grant helped him out. Said it was a favor between neighbors. But after Daddy passed, Grant came to me. Said the debt transferred to family. $50,000. When was this? 2 years ago. I've been paying him $500 a month from our savings. I didn't tell you because I was ashamed, and I thought I could handle it. She sobbed now, her whole body shaking. But last month, I couldn't make the payment. Grant sent Dominic to collect. That's why he came to the house. Not for a donation fund. For the money I owed. Everything I thought I knew about that night shattered. This wasn't just corruption. This was a carefully constructed trap. Grant had leverage over Morgan. Dominic had an obsession. And when she couldn't pay, they'd used it as an excuse to hurt her, sending a message that she belonged to them now. How much do you still owe? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. $38,000, she whispered. Hunter, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. If I had just told you, stop. I reached across the table and took her hand. None of this is your fault. They're criminals. They prey on people who can't fight back. What are we going to do? I looked into her terrified eyes and made a decision. You're going to stay with your sister in Colorado. Tonight. Pack a bag, take the emergency cash from the safe, and leave. I'm not leaving you here. Yes, you are. Because what happens next, you can't be anywhere near. I squeezed her hand harder. Morgan, I need you to trust me one more time. Can you do that? She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. Good. When you get to your sister's, text me a single word. Clear. That's how I'll know you're safe. Don't call. Don't come back. No matter what you hear, stay away until I contact you. You're scaring me. I know. But I promise you, this ends soon. After she left, I requested to speak with Dr. Eliza again. She came into my room with her clipboard, professional smile in place. I need to confess something else, I said, making my voice sound broken, defeated. I've been having intrusive thoughts about hurting myself. I don't think I can take being in here anymore. Her expression shifted to concern. Hunter, that's very serious. I'll need to put you on 24-hour watch and adjust your medication. I understand. I need help. She made notes, asked more questions, and increased my supervision, which meant exactly what I needed. My room checked every 15 minutes by orderlies who were overworked and underpaid. That night, at 2 in the morning, I made my move. I've been watching the patrol patterns for 3 days. The orderly assigned to my wing was a guy named Mason who spent most of his shift on his phone. When he checked my room, I was under the covers with pillows arranged to look like a sleeping body. I was actually in the ceiling, having removed a panel earlier. I crawled through the ductwork, tight, claustrophobic, exactly like crawling through insurgent tunnels in Kandahar, until I reached the administrative wing. I dropped down into an empty office, accessed the computer using a password I'd watched Dr. Eliza type, and printed my own discharge papers with her forged signature. I walked out the front door at 3 in the morning wearing scrubs I'd stolen from the laundry, my fake paperwork in hand. The night guard barely glanced at me. By dawn, I was back in town. Morgan's text had come through an hour earlier. Clear. Now it was time to dismantle everything Grant and Dominic had built. Not with evidence. Not with lawyers. With fear. I started with Dominic's bank accounts. Ryder had given me access codes. I drained them. Every penny transferred to an offshore account that would be nearly impossible to trace. $47,000 gone in seconds. Then I went to his apartment. The lock was laughably easy. Inside, I didn't steal anything. I just moved things. His gun from the nightstand to the kitchen counter. His badge from the dresser to the bathroom sink. Family photos turned face down. A single message written on his bathroom mirror in soap. I see you. Dominic would come home and know someone had been inside. Someone who could have killed him but chose not to. Yet, next was Grant's hunting cabin. I returned under cover of darkness and did something that would haunt him forever. I exhumed Ivy's remains, carefully, respectfully, and moved them to a new location where they'd be found. Then I left an anonymous tip with the state police, not the local department. By morning, Grant's perfect little conspiracy was starting to unravel, and I was just getting started. The state police found Ivy's remains exactly where I'd left them, in a shallow grave behind an abandoned church on the edge of town. The location was deliberate. It was public enough that Grant couldn't make it disappear, but isolated enough that he'd know someone had moved her there intentionally. I watched the news coverage from a motel 2 towns over. The reporter stood in front of yellow crime scene tape, her face grave as she described the discovery of human remains believed to be connected to a cold case from 6 years ago. The state police had taken over the investigation. Grant's department was officially sidelined. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You're making a mistake. I didn't respond. Let them sweat. Dominic was unraveling faster than I'd anticipated. I knew this because I'd placed a listening device in his apartment during my visit. For the past 2 days, I'd been listening to him spiral. He called Grant 17 times. Most went to voicemail. When Grant finally answered, their conversation was tense. Someone's in my head, Dominic said, his voice shaking. They were in my apartment. They took my money. They know things, Grant. Calm down. It's probably just, don't tell me to calm down. You said this was handled. You said Hunter was locked up. He was. He escaped psychiatric hold 2 days ago. We're looking for him. There was a long silence. Then Dominic's voice dropped to a whisper. He's coming for us, isn't he? Get yourself together. Meet me at the usual place in 1 hour. The usual place was a bar called the Rusty Nail on the outskirts of town. I'd been there once, years ago. Dark lighting, cash only, the kind of place where cops went to drink off the clock without questions. I arrived 30 minutes early and parked across the street with a clear view of the entrance. Grant's truck pulled up first, followed by Dominic's patrol car. They went inside together. I waited 10 minutes, then walked in wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a jacket with the collar up. The bar was nearly empty, just a few regulars nursing beers and watching a hockey game on the TV. Grant and Dominic sat in a corner booth, their heads close together, talking in urgent whispers. I took a seat at the bar where I could watch them in the mirror behind the bottles. What can I get you? The bartender asked, a woman named Violet with tattoo sleeves and tired eyes. Whiskey. Neat. She poured and slid it over. I sipped slowly, listening. Grant's voice carried just enough for me to catch fragments. State police are asking questions about the cabin. Should have never kept her there. Too late now. We stick to the story. Dominic's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his beer. What if they find something we missed? What if there's DNA? There won't be. I cleaned that site myself. You said that about Hunter too, and look where we are now. Grant's jaw tightened. Hunter is one man. He's got no evidence, no allies, and he's a fugitive. The second he surfaces, we put him down. Self-defense. Problem solved. I set my glass down carefully, paid cash, and walked out before they noticed me. But I'd heard enough. They were planning to kill me the moment they found me, which meant I needed to move faster. Over the next 3 days, I became a ghost. I hit them in ways they couldn't predict and couldn't stop. I called Dominic's ex-wife, a woman named Brooke who divorced him 5 years ago after he put her in the hospital. I told her about the state investigation, about Ivy, about Morgan. I gave her the name of a victim's advocate and a lawyer who specialized in reopening domestic violence cases. Within 48 hours, she'd filed a formal complaint with the state police, complete with medical records Grant had buried. I hacked Grant's email and sent copies of his financial records to the county ethics board. Turns out the sheriff had been skimming from evidence lockers and taking kickbacks from a local drug dealer named Felix. The ethics board opened an investigation immediately. I left Dominic's patrol car unlocked in a bad neighborhood, with his service weapon visible on the seat. By morning, the gun was gone, reported stolen, and Dominic was suspended pending an internal review. Every day, I tightened the noose a little more. And every day, I watched them come apart. Grant started drinking heavily. I could see it in his face on the local news when reporters ambushed him outside the station. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie crooked, his answers defensive and hostile. Dominic stopped showing up for work entirely. The listening device in his apartment picked up hours of him pacing, muttering to himself, arguing with people who weren't there. But I wasn't done yet. 1 week after Ivy's body was discovered, I broke into Grant's house while he was at the station. His wife, a woman named Natalie, was out shopping. I had 30 minutes. I didn't trash the place. I didn't steal anything. I simply planted evidence where she'd find it. Receipts from motels. Charges to his credit card for jewelry he'd never given her. Text messages I'd fabricated between him and a woman who didn't exist, printed and left in his desk drawer. I wanted her to see who he really was. I wanted his home life to crumble the way he'd tried to crumble mine. Then I did something that would haunt him forever. I went into his office and found his gun safe. The combination was taped under the desk. Amateurs always get lazy. Inside were 3 unregistered handguns, 2 bags of cocaine, and a stack of photographs. The photographs were of women, young women. Some I recognized from missing persons reports over the years. Others I didn't. But they all had one thing in common. They looked terrified. My hands shook as I photographed every single image. This wasn't just about Ivy or Morgan anymore. This was bigger, darker. These men weren't just corrupt. They were predators who'd been hunting for years. I uploaded the photos to an encrypted server, then sent an anonymous package to 3 people. A reporter at the state's largest newspaper, an FBI field agent in Denver, and a senator who'd built her career on criminal justice reform. Inside each package was a USB drive containing everything. The photos, Grant's financial records, Dominic's disciplinary history, witness statements I'd collected from women they'd hurt, and GPS data placing both men at the cabin the night Ivy disappeared. I included one note. The men who wear badges in this county are monsters. Prove me wrong. By the time Grant got home that night, the walls were already closing in. He just didn't know it yet. I watched from across the street as he pulled into his driveway. Watched as Natalie met him at the door, papers in her hand, her face twisted with rage. Watched as she screamed at him, threw his bags on the lawn, and slammed the door in his face. Grant stood there for a long moment, staring at his own front door like he couldn't believe what had just happened. Then his phone rang. He answered, listened, and his face went completely white. He looked up and down the street, turning in a slow circle, searching for something he couldn't see. He was looking for me. I smiled in the darkness and drove away. The hunt was almost over. Now came the reckoning. The news broke 3 days later. The headline in the state newspaper read, County Sheriff under federal investigation for corruption, evidence tampering, and possible connection to cold case murder. Within hours, it was everywhere. Local news, regional outlets, even a segment on the national morning shows. Grant's face was plastered across every screen, looking haggard and cornered as reporters shouted questions at him outside the courthouse. The FBI had moved fast. They'd raided the sheriff's station at dawn, seizing computers, files, and evidence lockers. Dominic had been brought in for questioning and hadn't been seen since. Rumor was he'd lawyered up and stopped talking. But there was still one piece of the puzzle I hadn't touched yet. Judge Adrian Hale. Hale had been the presiding judge in this county for 20 years. He'd dismissed every complaint against Grant's department, signed off on every warrant they'd requested, and looked the other way when evidence mysteriously disappeared from lockup. He was the legal shield that had protected them for decades, and he was about to lose everything. I'd spent the last week digging into Hale's life. His financials showed payments from shell companies connected to Felix, the drug dealer Grant had been protecting. His calendar showed private meetings with Grant that were never officially recorded. And his personal life? That's where it got interesting. Judge Hale had a mistress. Her name was Quinn, a paralegal half his age who worked in the county clerk's office. He'd been seeing her for 3 years, paying for her apartment, her car, even her student loans. His wife, Ophelia, had no idea, but she was about to. I created a fake email account and sent Ophelia a simple message with attachments, bank statements showing the payments, photos of Hale and Quinn entering her apartment together, and restaurant receipts from expensive dinners charged to his personal card. The subject line read, "Your husband is not the man you think he is." I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. 2 days later, Ophelia filed for divorce and submitted a formal complaint to the State Judicial Oversight Committee. She included copies of every document I'd sent her, plus a few she'd found on her own. Hale tried to do damage control, but the committee opened an ethics investigation immediately. The media circled like sharks. A judge caught in an affair while presiding over a department now under federal investigation? The story wrote itself. But I wasn't satisfied with just destroying his marriage. I needed him exposed in a way that would end his career permanently. I reached out to Ryder one more time. I need access to sealed court records. Cases that Hale presided over in the last 5 years. That's highly illegal, Ryder said. So is everything else you've done for me. Can you do it or not? He sighed. Give me 2 days. When the files came through, I spent an entire night reading. What I found made my stomach turn. Hale had been dismissing domestic violence cases at an alarming rate, always in favor of the defendant when the defendant was a cop. Women would file protective orders, show up to court with evidence, and Hale would rule against them, citing insufficient proof, or he said, she said. One case stood out. A woman named Lila had filed charges against a deputy named Kyle for assault. She'd had photos, medical records, and a witness. Hale dismissed the case and sealed the records, claiming the evidence was obtained improperly. 2 months later, Lila was found dead in her apartment. Cause of death was ruled suicide, but the investigating officer had been Grant. I copied every sealed file, every dismissal, every connection between Hale, Grant, and the officers they protected. Then I sent the entire package to the same reporter who'd broken the original story, along with a note. Judge Hale isn't just corrupt. He's complicit in covering up violence against women for decades. The reporter ran with it. Within 48 hours, the state attorney general announced a formal investigation into judicial misconduct. Hale was suspended pending the outcome. His law license was under review. His career was over. But the man himself? He was scared. I could see it in the way he moved, constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at shadows, checking his car for tampering every morning. Good. He should be scared. One evening, I followed him to a private club downtown where he met with his attorney, a slick man named Preston who specialized in defending powerful people caught doing terrible things. I couldn't get close enough to hear their conversation, but I didn't need to. Their body language said everything. Preston was trying to calm Hale down, but Hale kept shaking his head, gesturing wildly, his face red with anger and fear. When they finally left, I followed Hale to his car. He was alone now, fumbling with his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice. I stepped out of the shadows. Judge Hale. He spun around, his eyes going wide. Who are you? Someone who knows what you've done. He backed against his car, his breath coming in short gasps. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a judge. I have protection, not anymore. I stepped closer, keeping my voice low and calm. Your protection is gone. Grant's going to prison. Dominic's cooperating with the feds to save his own skin. And you? You're next. I didn't do anything. His voice cracked. I just signed papers. I followed procedure. You dismissed cases that could have saved lives. You protected men who hurt women. You took money to look the other way while people suffered. I stopped a foot away from him, letting him see my face clearly. My wife almost died because of men you protected. So did a lot of other women. Please, he whispered. I have a family. I can fix this. I can testify. I can. You're going to do exactly that, I said. You're going to cooperate with every investigation. You're going to tell them everything you know about Grant, Dominic, and anyone else involved. And if you even think about running or changing your story, the world will know about every dirty secret you've buried. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo, one of many I'd taken of him with Quinn, along with financial records showing bribes from Felix. This goes public if you don't do exactly what I say. Understand? He nodded, tears streaming down his face. Good. I turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. The women whose cases you dismissed? You're going to make it right. Apologies. Restitution. Whatever it takes. Because if I hear about you hiding behind lawyers or playing the victim, I'll come back. And next time, I won't be this nice. I walked away, leaving him trembling against his car. The next morning, Hale's attorney released a statement saying his client would be cooperating fully with state and federal investigators. By afternoon, news broke that Hale had agreed to testify against Grant in exchange for a reduced sentence. The dominoes were falling. Grant's legal protection was gone. His personal life was in ruins. His crimes were being exposed piece by piece. And Dominic? He was about to learn that running wouldn't save him. Dominic stopped sleeping at his apartment after Judge Hale agreed to cooperate. I knew this because the listening device I'd planted went silent for 3 straight days. He was hiding, moving between cheap motels on the outskirts of town, paying cash, trying to stay off the grid. But men like Dominic always make mistakes when they're scared. And his mistake was routine. Every morning at 6, he drove to a gas station on Route 9 to buy coffee and cigarettes. He thought he was being careful, different route each time, always checking his mirrors, parking where he could see the exits. But careful isn't the same as invisible. I watched him for 4 days, learning his patterns. He favored the same brand of cigarettes. He always paid inside, never at the pump. And most importantly, he always parked in the far corner of the lot, away from cameras. On the 5th morning, I was waiting. He pulled in at 6:15, his patrol car replaced by a beat-up Honda Civic he'd probably borrowed from someone. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him, unshaven, hollow-eyed, jumping at every sound. The confidence that came with wearing a badge was gone. Now he was just a man running from consequences. He went inside. I moved fast. I disabled his car's interior lights the night before when he'd stopped at a different motel. Now I slipped into the back seat and waited, a chloroform-soaked rag in one gloved hand. 3 minutes later, he returned with coffee and a pack of Marlboros. He got in, locked the doors, and reached for the ignition. I struck. The rag covered his mouth and nose before he could scream. He thrashed, clawing at my arm, trying to reach for the gun he no longer carried. But the chemicals worked fast. Within 30 seconds, his body went limp. I zip-tied his wrists and ankles, covered his mouth with duct tape, and threw a blanket over him. Then I drove his car to a storage facility I'd rented under a fake name 2 weeks earlier. The unit was soundproof, thick walls, no windows, and far enough from the main office that no one would hear anything. I dragged him inside and cuffed him to a metal chair bolted to the concrete floor. Then I waited for him to wake up. It took 20 minutes. His eyes fluttered open, confused at first, then widening with terror when he realized where he was and who was sitting across from him. I'd set up a camera on a tripod, the red recording light blinking steadily. Between us sat a table with a single folder on it. "Good morning, Dominic," I said calmly. He tried to speak, but the tape muffled his words into desperate, garbled sounds. "I'm going to remove the tape," I continued, "and you're going to talk. If you scream, I put it back and we start over. Understand?" He nodded frantically. I peeled the tape away slowly. He gasped for air, coughing. "Please," he wheezed. "Please don't kill me. I'll do anything. I'm not going to kill you," I said. "I'm going to give you a choice. You can tell me everything. Every crime you've committed, every person you've hurt, every order Grant gave you, and I'll let you walk out of here. Or you can lie to me, and I'll make sure the feds find evidence that guarantees you spend the rest of your life in prison. I'll talk. I'll tell you everything. Good. I opened the folder and slid a photo across the table. It was Ivy. Start with her. His face crumbled. That wasn't supposed to happen. Grant said he just wanted to scare her, make her leave town. But she wouldn't stop asking questions about the money she'd loaned him. She threatened to go to the county auditor. So you killed her? No. Grant did. I helped him move the body. I didn't know he was going to. His voice broke. I was young. I was stupid. He said we'd both go down if anyone found out. And Morgan, my wife. Dominic looked down, shame flooding his face. I never stopped thinking about her. After high school, I thought maybe if I became someone important, wore a badge, she'd see me differently. But she married you instead. And when her dad's debt came up, Grant said it was an opportunity. Said I could collect the money and reconnect with her. You broke her ribs in 8 places, I said, my voice like ice. You punctured her lung. You beat her so badly, she didn't recognize herself in the mirror. I didn't mean to, he shouted, tears streaming down his face. She pushed me away, said she'd never belonged to me, that I was pathetic. Something inside me just snapped. I couldn't stop. And when I realized what I'd done, I panicked. Grant said he'd cover it up, make it look like a burglary. But then you came back, and everything fell apart. I sat back, letting his confession hang in the air. The camera had recorded every word. What else? I asked. What do you mean? You and Grant didn't just hurt Ivy and Morgan. There were others. Tell me about them. For the next 2 hours, Dominic talked. He confessed to planting evidence on suspects Grant wanted arrested, to falsifying reports to protect officers who used excessive force, to collecting protection money from Felix's drug operation. And most damning of all, he admitted that Ivy wasn't the only woman who disappeared after crossing Grant. There were 3 others over the years. Women who'd filed complaints, threatened lawsuits, or simply knew too much. Some were ruled runaways. Others were cold cases. But Dominic knew where they all were. I made him draw a map, marking each location. When he finally finished, he looked at me with desperate, pleading eyes. I told you everything. You said you'd let me go. I said I'd give you a choice, I corrected. And I did. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to take this recording and every piece of evidence you just gave me, and you're going to turn yourself into the FBI field office in Denver. Not the local police. Not the state police. The FBI. They'll put me away for life. Maybe. Or maybe they'll offer you a deal in exchange for testimony against Grant and everyone else involved. Either way, you're done hurting people. And if I don't, I leaned forward. Then I released this recording to every news outlet in the country, along with the locations of those bodies. You'll be hunted by the families of those women, by the media, and by every prisoner who hates cops. You won't last 6 months. His face went pale. That's not a choice. That's extortion. No, I said, standing. That's justice. You get to live. You get to confess. You might even get some reduced sentence for cooperating. That's more mercy than you showed any of those women. I uncuffed him from the chair, but left his wrists bound. There's a phone on the table with the FBI's number already dialed. You have 24 hours to make the call. If I don't see a news report about your surrender by tomorrow night, I'll assume you chose prison the hard way. I left him there, sitting in that cold storage unit, and drove away. By the next evening, news broke that a former officer had surrendered to federal authorities and was providing testimony in connection with multiple unsolved cases. Dominic's face flashed across the screen, looking broken and defeated as agents led him into the building. The reporter's voice was grave. Sources say the suspect's testimony could lead to additional arrests, including high-ranking officials in the county sheriff's department. I turned off the TV. Grant knew he was finished the moment Dominic walked into that FBI building. I watched him from across the street as he stumbled out of a bar at 2 in the morning, drunk and desperate. His truck was gone, impounded during the federal raid. His wife had left him. His badge was suspended. Everything he'd built was crumbling. But I wasn't satisfied with just watching him fall. I needed him to understand why. He lived alone now in a rental house on the edge of town, the kind of place with peeling paint and bars on the windows. I waited until he passed out on the couch, then let myself in through the back door. I stood over him for a moment, studying his face. Without the uniform and the authority, he looked small, ordinary, just another corrupt man who'd gotten away with it for too long. I pressed a cloth soaked in chloroform over his mouth. He didn't even struggle. When he woke up, he was in the same storage unit where I'd held Dominic. Same chair, same cuffs, same camera recording every moment. His eyes focused on me slowly, confusion giving way to rage. You, me, I said simply. You're a dead man, Hunter. The feds are looking for you. Kidnapping, assault. They'll hunt you down. They're looking for a ghost. I interrupted. But they're not looking very hard. Know why? Because right now, they're too busy building a case against you. Grant's jaw clenched. I want a lawyer. This isn't a trial. This is a conversation. I pulled out the folder containing everything Dominic had given me. Maps, confessions, financial records. I spread them across the table slowly, watching Grant's face go from defiant to pale. Dominic told me everything, I said. About Ivy. About the other women. About the money. About how you've been running this county like your personal kingdom for 20 years. That little coward, Grant spat. He'll say anything to save himself. Probably. But he also gave me something you can't dismiss. I pulled out the final piece, a ledger written in Grant's own handwriting, recovered from his office safe. This is your insurance policy. Every bribe you took, every deal you made, every politician you paid off. You kept records because you thought it would protect you if anyone turned on you. His face drained of color. Where did you get that? Doesn't matter. What matters is that the FBI is going to get a copy. So is the state attorney general. So is every newspaper in the region. I leaned forward. You're going to prison, Grant. The only question is how much you suffer before you get there. What do you want? His voice was barely a whisper now. I want you to feel what Morgan felt. What Ivy felt. What every woman you hurt felt. I want you to know what it's like to be powerless. I never touched your wife. That was all Dominic. You sent him there. I roared, slamming my hand on the table. You knew what he was. You knew he was obsessed with her. You used her father's debt as an excuse to send a violent man to my home, and you laughed when she ended up in the hospital. Grant's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Here's what's going to happen. I continued, my voice cold and controlled again. You're going to confess everything to the FBI. Every crime, every cover-up, every person you hurt. And you're going to do it because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows about the trafficking. His eyes went wide. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out a USB drive and held it up. The women in those photos from your safe? I found 3 of them. They're alive. Barely. Being held in a house 2 counties over, run by Felix's operation. The same operation you've been protecting for years. I didn't know about that, he stammered. Felix never told me. You took money from a man running drugs and trafficking women, and you expect me to believe you didn't know? I shook my head. The FBI is raiding that house tomorrow morning based on an anonymous tip. And when those women start talking, they're going to mention the sheriff who looked the other way. Grant's breathing became rapid and shallow. He was trapped, and he knew it. You have one chance, I said. Confess everything. Cooperate completely. Maybe you get 20 years instead of life. Maybe you survive prison. Or you stay silent, and I make sure every inmate knows you're a dirty cop who protected traffickers. That's a death sentence. Yes, it is. He stared at the floor for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded. Okay, I'll talk. Good. I uncuffed him and handed him a phone. Call your lawyer. Tell him you're ready to make a deal with the feds. And Grant, if you try to run, if you try to warn anyone, if you do anything except exactly what I told you, I'll find you. And next time, I won't be this merciful. I left him there with the phone and walked out. 3 days later, Grant surrendered to federal authorities. The news showed him being led into the courthouse in handcuffs, his head down, his face defeated. The charges were extensive: corruption, evidence tampering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder. The investigation expanded to include Felix's entire operation. 18 people were arrested. 4 missing women were found alive, and 2 more bodies were recovered based on Dominic's testimony. It was over. The system that had protected them was dismantled. The men who'd hurt Morgan were facing justice. But for me, there was one final step. The trial started 4 months later. I watched from the back of the courtroom, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, just another face in the crowd of reporters and spectators who'd come to see a corrupt sheriff finally face consequences. Grant sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his shoulders slumped, looking 20 years older than when I'd first confronted him at the station. His attorney, a young public defender named Blake, who looked overwhelmed, shuffled papers nervously as the prosecution laid out their case. The lead prosecutor was a woman named Harper from the state attorney general's office. She was sharp, methodical, and ruthless. She opened with a timeline of Grant's crimes spanning 2 decades, complete with financial records, witness testimony, and the recordings I'd provided anonymously. "This man wore a badge," Harper said, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "He took an oath to protect and serve. Instead, he built a criminal empire that preyed on the most vulnerable members of this community. He extorted money from grieving families. He protected drug dealers and violent officers. And when people tried to stop him, he made them disappear." The jury listened, their faces hardening with each revelation. Over the next 3 weeks, witness after witness took the stand. Dominic testified first, his voice shaking as he described how Grant had orchestrated cover-ups, ordered evidence destroyed, and threatened anyone who questioned his authority. Judge Hale testified next, explaining how he dismissed cases and sealed records at Grant's request in exchange for campaign contributions and personal favors. Then came the women, the survivors. Brooke, Dominic's ex-wife, described years of abuse and how Grant had helped Dominic avoid consequences. A woman named Tessa told the jury how Grant had extorted money from her after her husband's accidental death, threatening to reopen the investigation as a homicide if she didn't pay. Another woman, Giselle, testified that Grant had assaulted her during a traffic stop and then buried her complaint. But the most powerful testimony came from someone I hadn't expected. Morgan. I hadn't known she was coming back for the trial. She'd stayed in Colorado like I'd asked, recovering slowly, working with a therapist to process the trauma. When I saw her walk to the witness stand, my heart stopped. She looked stronger than the last time I'd seen her. Her ribs had healed. The bruises were gone. But there was something different in her eyes, a hardness that came from surviving something that should have killed her. The prosecutor asked her to describe the night Dominic attacked her. Morgan spoke clearly, her voice steady, recounting every detail. The courtroom was silent except for her words. "He said I belonged to him," she said, looking directly at Grant. "And when I refused, he beat me until I couldn't breathe. When I begged him to stop, he laughed. And when I asked why, he said the sheriff had given him permission." Grant's attorney objected, but the judge overruled. The damage was done. The jury had heard enough. When the defense tried to cross-examine her, Morgan didn't flinch. She answered every question with the same calm strength, never breaking, never backing down. I wanted to run to her, to hold her, to tell her how proud I was. But I stayed in my seat, invisible, knowing that if anyone connected me to this case, everything could unravel. The prosecution's final witness was an FBI agent named Victor who'd led the raid on Felix's trafficking operation. He described finding the house, the condition of the women inside, and the financial records that tied everything back to Grant. "In my 20 years with the Bureau," Agent Victor said, I've never seen this level of corruption in a single department. This wasn't just a few bad apples. This was systematic abuse of power orchestrated by a man who believed he was untouchable. The defense had nothing. Blake tried to argue that Grant was just following orders, that he'd been manipulated by others, that he deserved leniency for cooperating. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and read the verdict. On the charge of corruption, guilty. On the charge of extortion, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, guilty. On the charge of accessory to murder, guilty. Grant's face remained blank as the verdicts continued. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 17 counts in total. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. When that day came, the courtroom was packed again. Morgan sat in the front row with her sister. I sat in the back, watching. The judge, a stern woman named Jocelyn brought in from another district, didn't waste time. Mr. Grant, you betrayed the public trust in the most egregious way possible. You used your position to harm the people you swore to protect. The law demands accountability, and today you will receive it. She sentenced him to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Grant's legs buckled as the bailiffs led him away. He didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Morgan. She gave a brief statement about justice and healing, then walked away with her head held high. I followed at a distance until she reached her car. She stopped, turned, and looked directly at me across the parking lot. Our eyes met. She knew I was there. She'd probably known the whole time. She nodded once, a small gesture that carried everything we couldn't say out loud, then got in her car and drove away. I stood there for a long time, watching the courthouse empty. Grant was going to prison. Dominic was cooperating with ongoing investigations. Judge Hale's career was over. Felix's operation was dismantled. The system that had protected them was broken. The men who'd hurt Morgan were paying the price. But I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. There were still questions about my involvement, about the evidence that had mysteriously appeared, about the confessions that had been recorded. The FBI had opened an investigation into vigilante activity connected to the case. They didn't have my name yet, but they would eventually, which meant it was time to disappear. 6 months after the trial, I stood on a beach in North Carolina watching the sunrise. The water was calm, the sand cool beneath my feet, and for the first time in over a year, I could breathe without feeling like my chest was caving in. Morgan was inside our small rental house, making coffee. We'd moved here under different names, paid cash for everything, and kept our heads down. The FBI had eventually closed their investigation into the vigilante activity, not because they didn't suspect someone had orchestrated everything, but because every piece of evidence they found was admissible and legally obtained through anonymous tips. They couldn't prove I'd done anything illegal, even though they knew. Agent Victor had shown up at our door 3 months ago. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, drinking the coffee Morgan offered, and said, "I know it was you." I didn't respond. "I can't prove it," he continued. "And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Grant and his people destroyed lives for decades. Someone needed to stop them. The system failed, so someone else stepped in." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "But if you ever cross that line again, if you ever take justice into your own hands, I will find you. And next time, I won't look the other way." "There won't be a next time," I said. He nodded and walked out. Morgan came up behind me now on the beach, wrapping her arms around my waist. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost. Her laugh had returned. The nightmares were less frequent. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "How we got here," I said. "Everything we survived." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it?" "What you did?" I thought about Grant sitting in a federal prison cell, about Dominic cooperating with investigators, knowing he'd never be free again, about Judge Hale losing everything he'd built on corruption, about the women who'd finally gotten justice. "No," I said. "I don't regret it." "Good." She squeezed me tighter. "Because I don't either." We stood there as the sun climbed higher. painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere behind us, our new life waited, simple, quiet, anonymous. I'd found work as a security consultant under my new identity. Morgan was taking online classes to finish her degree. We talked about starting that family we'd always wanted. The past would always be there, hovering at the edges of our memories. The violence, the fear, the months of living in survival mode. But we'd come through it together, and that was what mattered. My phone buzzed. A text from Tristan, the only person from my old life who knew how to reach me. Heard the news. Felix rolled on his suppliers. 3 more arrests. You did good work. I deleted the message and turned off the phone. Everything okay? Morgan asked. Everything's perfect, I said, and meant it. We walked back to the house hand in hand. Inside, the coffee was ready, and the morning stretched ahead of us with no threats, no danger, no one hunting us. For the first time in a long time, we were safe. And we were free. The system had failed us. So I became the consequence it refused to deliver. I didn't do it for revenge, though that was part of it. I did it because sometimes the only way to stop monsters is to become something they fear more. Grant thought his badge made him untouchable. Dominic thought his violence made him powerful. They learned the hard way that power without accountability is just tyranny waiting to fall. And when it finally fell, I made sure it buried them completely. Morgan and I sat on the porch that evening, watching the stars come out. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I felt the tension that had lived in my body for months finally release. Do you think we'll ever feel normal again? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. But I think we'll build something better than normal. Something that's ours. She smiled. I'd like that. The night was peaceful. The ocean whispered against the shore. And somewhere far away, in a prison cell, Grant was learning what it meant to be powerless. Justice isn't always clean. It isn't always legal. But sometimes it's necessary. And sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to become the nightmare that haunts their enemies. I'd become that nightmare. I'd done things I couldn't undo. But I'd also saved lives, exposed corruption, and made sure that the men who hurt Morgan would never hurt anyone again. Was it worth it? I looked at my wife, alive and healing beside me, and knew the answer. Yes, it was worth everything. Story finished, so what did you think?